Okay, so welcome to what we're hoping will be a season. Ooh. So it's a crazy world we're in at the moment, obviously. Thanks to all of you who have contributed in this off season that we've had so far. I've both myself and the coaches, we've had a lot of good sit down talks with people, giving lots of people good review and having good discussions about where people want to be next year and all those kinds of things. We've also had a lot of good feedback in regards to the things that we want to do, how we're going to do it, how we're going to get there, and everything like that. So those of you that contributed in this off season, that's really, really great. Thank you for that. We're looking at the playbook, or at least the playbook as it stands right now. As with everything, if you were around last year, one of the things you remember is that we added creases as we went on. We changed bits and bobs as we went on and those kinds of things. And that's certainly going to happen as well this upcoming season. Based on what we see on film, based on how things work in game, the personnel that we have, and all those kinds of things, we're always looking to adapt to put ourselves in the best position to obviously defend our end zone. So with that in mind, let's just take a quick look through the PDF. A lot of the information is in there that I will just skip over and that you can read in your own time. But there's a few bits that I'll talk about the whys we're doing it, the expectations of what we will be using it for as well. And then if there are any further questions, you can always contact one of your positional coaches or myself directly, and we can kind of fill in the gaps from there. This video is purely for the vets, for the returners next year, and for the coaches if they want to look at it. Defensive players initially, but also any offensive players who have aspirations of becoming a ball player, who want to have a look and get under good understanding of what we're trying to do and why. Videos here for it as well. We're going to do a whole bunch of other videos once the rookies are in and all those kinds of things, and we look to do playbook things like that. Then we're going to do this kind of sit down once again, probably via Zoom or something very similar, so we can discuss the playbook a little bit more. So with that in doubt, with that in mind, let's have a look, shall we? A lot of the playbook this year, if you remember last year, it was very basic. There was a few formations and a few plays, and that's about it. So this year we've expanded it, so there's a lot more of the whys, personnel, who everybody is, and all those kinds of things, how we establish the strong side, etc. But the first thing I want to look at is our base formations. So as you can see here, we've got two base formations this year. So we don't just have a 3 front, we've also got a 4 front as well. Okay, or if you want to call it, a 5 and a 6 front, however you want to face it. Basically 3 or 4 defensive linemen on the field. So red, which is going to be our core for our 3 front, is what we basically played last year. And this is base for us. This is what we will probably spend most of our time in. We're very aggressive in this one. It allows us to do a lot of things. What it also allows us to do, which is one of the reasons I'm a big fan of it, is because it's symmetrical. We don't necessarily have a strong or a weak side. So that means when we are looking to send pressure, when we are looking to have offenses attack us and those kinds of things, they don't have an obvious route to attack us, which is one of my favorite things about it. Much like last year, the base formation of this will be D lineman, ends over tackles, center will be covered up by the tackle in the middle. We have our Rover and Hero, so that is the names for our Vipers. They'll be lined up, maybe split the difference, maybe 3-by-1, depending on team and depending on formation as well. So pretty much how we left it last year with their alignment. Initially they were 3-by-3, but we brought them a lot more down to the line. And primarily, just like last year, their key is going to be that force situation, keeping everything inside them, keeping everything nice and shallow towards the box that's coming out of the backfield. Slight change from this year is going to be the way that our linebackers are going to line off. So we're no longer groping the defensive linemen. Sam and Will are going to line up behind our defensive end, so over the tackles as well, but they're going to be about 4 yards off. And then Mike will be about 4.5 off as well over the tackle as well. Free safety will line up over the centre as well. So unlike last year when we lined up in our zones, we're going to line based off of the formation this year. So like I say, the safety will be lining up over the centre, and then our corners will both line up over the top of the number 1 receiver, about 7 yards out. So one of the main reasons that we've made the change down that linebacker area with alignment is so they don't get caught up too much with what's going on the line. So if our ends or our tackle, if they lose a battle, if they get double teamed, if they get pushed back, then we're not giving too much of an issue to our linebackers, still allowing them to flow. So giving them a little bit of extra space, maybe also to give them a little bit better vantage point as well, will allow them to hopefully react and not get swallowed up if one of our defensive linemen loses an assignment. In regards to our defensive backs, real simple, because I don't like to give too much away pre-snap. When we call man coverages and things like that, if we're lining up per zone like we did last year, we're putting our cornerbacks in a severe disadvantage if they're in man coverage. So rather than have a very obvious pre-snap tell what coverage we're in, by keeping the same vanilla lineup pre-snap, regardless of what we're doing, doesn't give too much away. Now, obviously, what that means is if we're wide on one side of the hashes, those kinds of things, then the corners are going to have to do a little bit harder work to get to their wide zones, not give up the sideline too much, that kind of thing. And also the free safety will have to learn that he's got to drop to the middle zone rather than just directly back. So there's just a few kind of changes to think about there when we're dropping to zones because of this new alignment. So the big change is the forefront, or white as we're calling it, and it's a box heavy formation. Now what we'll be doing with this one is a defensive lineman will come in and a linebacker will come off. So when we look at this, as you can tell from the picture itself, the tackles, the nose and the defensive tackle will line up directly over the A gap. Okay, and our ends in base will still line up directly over the tackles. So we've got 4 men on the front. Sam and Will still line up directly over the top of those offensive tackles as well. Everybody else lines up as per the 3 front as well. Apart from the free safety, now what the free safety is going to do is he'll creep down towards the box. He's still a free safety. He's still got either his man or his zone coverage, but he's just going to be teetering on the edge of that box. Okay, so somewhere around 6, 7, maybe 8 yards, something like that, so that he can get in there should there be any kind of situation in the box he needs to support, run heavy support. But he's far enough back that he can still, get his tail on, turn his hips, and get back to cover zone or something along those lines. So one of the things that we were missing last year, or at least not missing, but could have paid dividends in certain areas, is short yardage situations. So whether that is goal line, whether that is, when the sticks are close, or, even when we're looking at kind of punt return, those kinds of things. We didn't really have a solid core for that. Now, a lot of the year didn't really matter. We were talented enough to make up for that. But as always, when we take a step forward in competitive nature, we need to make sure that plan Bs and all those kinds of things, the whole squad is drilled in on that. So having this kind of situation, having this extra front in our back pockets allows us to be readily aware of an adjustment that we may need to make in certain situations. So rather than having to wait till a drive's over, a series is over, talk it through on the sidelines, what we would do, it's going to be in place. We know it, it's in our arsenal, so we can use it further. It's also being used, this white front, as punt return. Punt return itself this year is being it's being run via the special teams coordinator. But he's using the same verbiage and those kinds of things for punt return. So White primarily short yardage, goal line, and punt return. But also, you never know what's going to happen on the game day. If we have matchup problems, or if we look to really exploit a poor inside three on that line, something along those lines, who knows when this will pop up as well. But that's our forefront. So that's red and white, nice and easy. Red being 3, white being 4. So gap calls are all going to be pretty much exactly the same as last year. We've got flare, ends go outside. We've got slash, everyone's going to the strong side. Pinch, ends go inside. And wash, everyone going on the weak side. So nothing's changed there. Okay, we've still got all those gap calls as well. Nothing new. And what happens when we come to the forefront, for example? Essentially what the forefront is because the mic has been taken off and we've got 2 defensive linemen, both in those A gaps, they're going to have those A gaps filled anyway. As you can see on the pictures, the nose is generally going to the weak side in flare and in pinch as well. You would have a defensive lineman in the A gap in both strong and weak. So that Mike backer who would have picked up that opposite gap, the gap's still filled in that situation like that. So nothing has changed there. That still gives us lots of flexibility to be able to, clog up the middle, go down the weak side, all those kinds of things. Now, one of the new things that we've got this year is some adjustments, some defensive line adjustments to our formations. Now, what each of these 4 are primarily for is they tell our defensive ends somewhere else to line up. Okay, generally that's it. The only one that's slightly different is gap, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So stack, whenever we stack, that's base. Okay, so when I talked about with our 3 front or our 4 foot, those tackles get covered up by our ends, that's basically stack because we're stacking our ends up over the tackles. Great. When we call squash, all that happens is those defensive ends, they come inside by half a gap. Okay, so they line up in the B gaps on the strong and the weak side. Wide, they take themselves outside the ends, so they basically line up just on the outside shoulder of the ends. And then gap, which is for all defensive linemen, means you align to the gap which has been called. So the example I've got just down here shows gap flare. So flare, we know that the defensive ends have outside gaps, and so they've lined directly up over it. And we know that the nose has got the weak gap, so he's lined up directly over it as well. Okay, so we've got 4 variations that we will plug in and out of our 3 front and our 4 front. Now what it allows us to do is be flexible first and foremost. It allows us to make adjustments when necessary without having to discuss it on the sideline and all those kinds of things. What it also allows myself to do as a play caller is to introduce stunts in interesting different pressure packages and those kinds of things into our arsenal. So for example, if I was to call let's say red, wide, pinch, will go. In a situation here, here's wide. We can see that the end is pinching, so he's going to be driving across the face of the tackle in the B gap, because that's where his pinch responsibility is. And then having a will backer who would be up here about 4 yards, sending his pressure gap is over here. The end wraps around here, and the will backer's coming down here. So we've got a lot of kind of interesting little twists and stunts and all those kind of exciting things that defensive linemen beg to do are in the arsenal now, should we need to create a little bit of an exotic package, or just because they've done such a good job that we're going to reward them to see what kind of athlete they are as well. So that's really great and allows us to do that kind of thing. So that's just our adjustments on the line. Once again, these are all pre-snap adjustments rather than anything else. But it's just something different. It's something else that we can put on film. It's something else that can help us during the play calling, during the adjustments and everything like that. Man over adjustment, we know it's the same as last year. No rules have changed there. We're looking at hats. We're looking to move ourselves over on those unbalanced lines and everything like that. So that's nothing new there. Pressure packages will be exactly the same as last year as well. When we sent people after the quarterback into the backfield, we called it by number. You know that the linebackers are named 1 to 5 from strong to weak side. If we call 23, that's obviously the 2 and the 3 backer. If we call 23-4, that's the Sam, Mike, Will, etc., etc. 15, 25, whatever numbers you want to call and you want to think about for the pressure packages, it's all there because of those numbers. But that's once again something from last year. A little bit of information about wide receivers. Okay, so here's the next big difference from last year is our coverages. So we have a few new coverages this year. We've got cover 1. Everybody knows what cover 1 is, hopefully by now. If you've been following football, if you've been doing your time on the internet researching and talking about football, those kinds of things. Cover 1 is a zone-man hybrid. We've got a little bit of zone over the top and underneath, and then we've got, depending on where the wide receivers are, we've got players in man-to-man coverage. So by rule, free safety is always going to take the deep hold field. So that means he's going to need to be giving much more cushion to the deepest player than he would in cover 3, which was our traditional one last year, if you think about it. Whereas before he'd only be covering that middle field, he doesn't necessarily have to worry too much about angles and his ability to get to certain areas of the field because he's only dealing with that small portion. Now he's responsible for the entire sideline to sideline. My expectation is the free safety is going to be 10 yards or so deeper than the deepest man to allow him to break on routes. Okay, reading the quarterback, but he's got to have that ability and that speed and agility and acceleration that he can support sideline flares, streaks, whatever you want to call them as well. Cornerbacks get to show how much of a diva they are by going down and taking the number 1 receiver on both sides. So the corners will take the widest man, number 1, in each situation. Vipers will then take number 2 on the alignment, so the inside wide receiver. And then if there is a third wide receiver, then the linebacker, so Sam or Will be responsible for that wide receiver. Now, this is one of those things where is likely to change very, very quickly, depending on what formations are on, depending on what we see on film and those kinds of things. If we're looking at a trips-heavy offense, for example, we may play a little bit more adjustment zones like we did last year. Zone over calls, that kind of situation. We may realign who's doing man coverage, maybe even initiate some kind of slight pre-snap adjustment, to bring our best man coverage people into a situation to succeed, those kinds of things. But for now, the base cover 1 situation is free safety deep. Vipers and corners play man coverage with the inside linebackers, Sam and Will, picking up the number 3. So if that running back escapes that backfield, Sam and Will have got to have eyes on him and run out to meet him from there. That's our cover 1. Cover 3 stays exactly the same. Corners deep, free safety deep, and Rover Hero into the flats. Switch is another one. Switch just has corners staying in the flats and Rover Hero dropping to the deep zone instead. Now, that is a lot of kind of way to cover. One of the great things about this is it's just a change up first and foremost. One of the reasons why I like this one is that as Rover Hero are making their way to those deep zones, they cover up a lot of passing lanes as well. Okay, so we end up having, maybe 5, 6, 7, players in coverage around the short intermediate area in the first 3 or 4 seconds of a play. So it kind of stops a lot of short game situations. Once again, it's a change up. It's something that we is probably rarely going to be called, those kind of things, but it's something that we can call in certain situations when we're expecting certain things and everything like that. So that switch, Rover Hero deep, corners stay in the flat. Zone over that we know is exactly the same as last year once again. Rover Hero flats, and we squash the 2 zones which are free and the corner are covering. Nice and simple there. Cool. So one of the things I want to point out here is just to do with cover 1 and switch as well. So one of the key things that we're aware of with our Vipers is they play that force technique for us. They kind of define the edge, make sure everything's staying on the inside. So they're having to do a lot of work here in cover 1 and in turn cover in switch. So one of the things that will happen in these situations is who would be responsible for this force play. Now traditionally, if we're going to be in man coverage, I would say, the best part of 70% of the time we would be doing flare from this formation and sending some kind of extra pressure up the middle. In those situations, that because the ends have flare, that means they're essentially going to be defining that edge for us and everything like that. And if not, then Salmon will just have to have eyes to that outside and contain as best that they can. So just because we have changed the primary job for Rover and Hero doesn't mean that nobody else slacks off. We have other players from other positions who will pick up the slack to help us out from there. And that's about it, to be perfectly honest. We are play calling this year, so unlike last year when we just come out and do the same old thing, with minor adjustments, this year we are full on play calling. So the defensive captain will be on the field, and he will have a player coach, one of those things on the wrist pad, and we'll be calling plays in. I'm in the process of fully deciding how we're going to do that, whether it's going to be hand signals or just numbers, that kind of thing. So to be determined in regards to that. So that will be another slight variation on last year's defensive situation as well. And really that's about it. That's all I really wanted to highlight for you in regards to the book itself. So I did mention this for the 10 or 15 or so people that myself and the coaches had meetings with in the off season. So I'll just put it out there for everybody else who wasn't part of any of those meetings. Last year was the first full year. Obviously, I was in charge of the whole defense and brought the 3-3 scheme in the Christmas before, so we'd had half a season using it. So one of the intentions last year was to strip the entire playbook out and get the basics in and get us good at playing the basics, the fundamentals of the scheme. And I think last year we did a very, very good job of running the basics. Fast flowing to the ball, making sure that we weren't playing complicated football, making good football decisions, and getting that kind of base knowledge of what to do on the field. Now that we have, I think we only lost maybe 4 or 5 veterans due to graduation. So that gives us a great 15, 20, 25 returning defensive players who are now fully versed in the basics of the scheme. So it's a great time to start to add extra wrinkles and extra changes to enable us to become a little bit more dynamic if we need to. So that's one of the reasons why it's all come on board this year versus last year. The simplicity was there last year, plain and simple to get that year of the system under our belts. So we've got something to build off in the future. So foundation last year, now we're into a little bit more of the meat. And that's what's going to happen year on year, is just kind of more complexities. And that means the responsibility of the veterans, those that are under and have been under the scheme for year after year, become much more versed in passing that knowledge on to the rookie players. And I think this year is going to be even more important than possibly any other year that we've ever played for that, because of the possible time restrictions and everything like that we're going to have placed on training. So you know the basics of the playbook now. Now it's just about refining new bits and bobs, all those little gimmicky bits that we can do in there, all those fun little packages and pressures that we can send and everything like that to kind of spice it up for us. Now ultimately my goal is to still, for the most part, stay as simple as possible with what we're doing on the field. I believe we've got the talent for us to let yourselves do the work. I always think that the more talented a unit is, the less you have to scheme. Talent will overcome scheme. Okay, so if we have to start scheming against offenses, we've got the playbook now. As long as everybody's on top of it and understands what it all means and what they've got to do, that we can make schemes and that we can scheme up and overcome problems and situations that we face on tricky downs and all those kinds of things. As always, though, there is no substitute for actually being at training. So even though you may see this video, maybe you've read the playbook and you had a look at it and you've memorized it all at heart, there's always going to be slight tweaks, slight changes. There's going to be coaching points in regards to the scheme and everything that you will miss if you're not at training. So when training rolls round, make sure you're there, because those kind of slight differences, those changes, those what ifs and what if that happens, which aren't necessarily always clued up in the playbooks, be it training, so you can learn them and everything like that. Myself and all the staff are still out here, so if you had any questions about this and or anything else in the off season or leading up into it, or you had any concerns, then let us know. Otherwise, have a great time, and hopefully I'll see you on the field soon.